Vanchika, you can start.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I, Vanchika Dhyani, from Army Public School, Shankar Vihar, on behalf of SPIC MACAY, would like to extend a very warm welcome to all our participants in this session of Music and Prayer, Gregorian Chants from France. SPIC MACAY, Society for the Promotion of Indian Classical Music and Culture Amongst Youths, is a 44-year-old non-profit, non-political, voluntary global youth movement. Eminent artists and personalities of classical music, dance, and all other art forms have been delivering live and now online performances in educational institutions in India and abroad, impacting around 30 lakh students every year. By 2025, SPIC MACAY aims to have every child experience the inspiration and mysticism embodied in Indian and world heritage. We welcome you to the SPIC MACAY family. Now, I call Shreya to enlighten us about Anubhav.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Shreya Solanki from Army Public School, Shankar Vihar. Anubhav means experience. In the 75th year of India's independence, we celebrate Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav by organizing 150 plus workshops of Indian classical dance, music, folk arts, and traditional painting for 15,000 young students from schools and colleges in India and abroad. These workshops are conducted by reputed gurus who have received the highest government awards, and learning from them is a great opportunity. So, what do we want to achieve by organizing Anubhav 3? Dr. Kiran Seth, Professor Emeritus at IIT Delhi and founder SPIC MACAY, says, even if one student reaches their inner Mount Everest, I will think that our purpose is served. Let's celebrate this Navratri in surrendering to the divine forces. Thank you.
Now, we would have an artistic spiritual experience through Gregorian chants, followed by a discussion by Professor Reznikov Sir and Ustad Wazifuddin Dagarji.
Prigione peccata mundi, dona eis requiem, Sanctus Dominus Deus Sabaoth, dona eis requiem, Sanctus Dominus Deus Sabaoth, dona eis requiem, Prigione peccata mundi, dona eis requiem, Sanctus Dominus Deus Sabaoth, Hosanna in excelsis, Deus observiat gloria Sanctus Dominus Deus Sabaoth, Hosanna in excelsis, Deus observiat gloria Sanctus Dominus Deus Sabaoth, dona eis requiem, Prigione peccata mundi, dona eis requiem, Sanctus Dominus Deus Sabaoth, dona eis requiem, Prigione peccata mundi, dona eis requiem, Prigione peccata mundi, dona eis requiem, Prigione peccata mundi, dona eis requiem, Sanctus Dominus Deus Sabaoth, dona eis requiem, Sanctus Dominus Deus Sabaoth, dona eis requiem, Prigione peccata mundi, dona eis requiem, Sanctus Dominus Deus Sabaoth, dona eis requiem, Sanctus Dominus Deus Dominus Deus Sabaoth, dona eis requiem, regiones peccata mundi, dona eis requiem, Sanctus Dominus Deus Sabaoth,
Namaste to everyone. Welcome to this panel discussion on Gregorian chants. I'm very pleased to tell you that we have with us our esteemed guest Professor Egor Reznikov and Ustad Wasifuddin Dagar. So I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our guest. Professor Reznikov is a well-known specialist in ancient music, early Christian chants, and acoustic archaeology. His work encompassing architectural and corporal resonance, sound therapy, ethnomusicology, and ancient music practices is credited with helping to create a new concept and approaches in sound anthropology. He gave his first concerts in the field of ancient Christian chants in 1975 and today is particularly noted for his unique interpretation of the Gregorian chant. Professor Reznikov has given concerts and performed at International Music Festival on ancient music and music of oral traditions throughout Europe, the US, and Japan. A professor in philosophy department of University of Paris, Nantes, he has also guest lectured in several prestigious conservatories and religious communities. He had the honor of singing before the Dalai Lama in Zurich in 1991 and in the Shinto ceremonies for the Millennium Festivals in Kyoto in the year 2000, as well as in exceptional architectural sites such as Temple of Apollo in Delphos, Greece, and in Basilica of Saint Francis in Assisi, Italy. We also have with us Ustad Fayaz Wasifuddin Dagar. He is an Indian classical singer of a Dhrupad genre. He was awarded the Padma Shri in 2010. He is the son of late Ustad Nasir Fayazuddin Dagar and nephew of late Ustad N. Zahiruddin Dagar, the well-known junior Dagar brothers, and therefore a descendant of the legendary Haridas Dagar, Tansen's teacher. Between 1989 and 1994, he was groomed by his uncle Ustad Zahiruddin Dagar, with whom he used to sing Jugalbandis. He represents the 28th generation of dedicated Dagarwani Dhrupad singer in the Dagar family. His first major recordings were in Switzerland, India, and Japan in 1992. He toured North America performing Dhrupad solo since 2000. He has performed for the UNESCO in France and also toured the Netherlands, Belgium, Switzerland, Hungary in 1998. In America for the United Nations Peace Summit and the World Festival of Sacred Music of Dalai Lama in 2001. Namaste to both of you and welcome to this panel discussions. So I would like to start by asking Professor to tell us about Gregorian chants. So the audience is students and it would be nice to hear from you about Gregorian chants, its history and what is it?
Now about Gregorian chants, there are two aspects. What is known mostly by the name of Gregorian chant, it's a restoration of an ancient chant I will speak about, a restoration which was started at the end of the 19th century. Because, and that's the difference between our ancient traditions and ancient traditions in India. The difference being that the ancient traditions of India have remained, however, practiced by oral, what we call oral traditions. So there were musicians who were playing and teaching, and new generations and new generations. And for centuries, it went up until our time now. And for instance, Master Wasifuddin Dagar, of course, he has his own way of playing, which is different from the way of his teachers and different. But however, there is a continuity. You see, the oral tradition has remained. While in the West, the ancient traditions have disappeared. It was transformed from ancient oral traditions, monodic singing, one voice, you see, even if it was many people, but one voice together, and it has changed it. It became our Western music, you know, with orchestras, with pianos, and so. And the ancient traditions have disappeared. And at the end of the 19th century, some people, mostly monks in monasteries, decided to return to this ancient. Ancient means 1,500 years ago, chant, of which we had manuscripts from the 9th, 10th, 11th centuries, so more than 1,000 years ago. But the problem was that at the end of the 19th century, nor from the musical point of view, nor from the historical point of view, they had the knowledge with which they could really understand what it was from the historical point of view and what it was from the musical point of view. And now, at the second half, or at the end of the 20th century, so 100 years later than this restoration of the so-called Gregorian chant, we are much more aware and we know much more in the history of the past and much more about music, and particularly in the comparative study of music. And comparative here is very important because, as I will, I suppose, speak later, there is an Indo-European unity in music, exactly as you have the Indo-European unity of language. The notion of Indo-European language is quite meaningful. I'm sorry, I don't speak Sanskrit or Hindi, but I speak Russian, German, I know little Greek, Latin, French, and so on. And indeed, these languages are related. And I know some of Sanskrit and Sanskrit roots, and you see that they are the same. For instance, you have Veda and the root Vid, and in Russian, Vid is also vision, you see, and all these words that are common. But in music also, we have common roots and very strong roots. And you see this at the end of the 19th century. They didn't know, they didn't understand. At the end of the 19th century, they created, we may think, on the base of ancient manuscripts, which they didn't really understand these manuscripts, you see, because it was not notated in the modern notation of scores of music. It was an ancient notation. It was called pneumatic notation, which shows much more the movement on the sound. Oh, 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 oh. You see, it's the movement of the sound, and not notes. Oh, 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 oh. You see, just squares or little rounds. And from this, they created and they called it Gregorian chant. By the way, the name Gregorian chant is a 19th century name. In the 19th century time, they believed the legend there was Pope Gregory who created in the 6th century this song. But historically, it is completely false. The Pope Gregory, who was a great pope, he died in 604, had nothing to do with this chant. It's an historical error. And also from the musical point of view, well, they created what is called Gregorian chant, which is far from what was, as we understand it now, the real chant, which was sang, you see, the early Christian chant, you see, early Christian. And I don't say Gregorian because it has nothing to do with. But however, this tradition, mostly carried on by monks and by a monastery called Monastery of Solesmes in France, this Gregorian chant has spread over, and you all heard the name probably, a Gregorian chant. So now it's a tradition which has more than 100 years, and it's very respectable, yes. But so we have this tradition, and now we have what we now can understand of this tradition, which, as I said, is much more related to the Indo-European tradition of music. From the historical point of view, just to say two words more, it has nothing to do with Pope Gregory, nor it has to do with the Church of Rome. Rome, you know, the famous Rome, and which was the main town of the Christianity. You have the Pope of Rome, the main bishop, you know, of Rome. But the Church of Rome sang in a different way. We know now that the, let's say, Gregorian chant, or this ancient Christian chant, is not the church, this chant of the Church of Rome. It is related, of course, but it's not the same. This is from the historical point of view. And from the musical point of view, but we will speak later, and it will be interesting to listen to our friend Wajid Foudin. From the musical point of view, you see, the scales, this musical scales, I hope the students who are listening understand what is a scale. You see, it's the intervals. You know, sadi gamma. You see, you can have a high sadi and a little riga, and so you see the intervals can change, and this we call scales. Or in the Western notation, you can have do, re, mi. You can have do, re, mi bemol, flat, mi, flat, or in A, B, C, so C, D, E, E flat or not. So these are scales, we say. And of course, in the chant is, well, the chant started. It appeared, you see, from oral traditions from the 4th century, while Christianity could spread, you know, so before it was forbidden in the Roman Empire, you see, and persecuted, and there were martyrs. But then, starting from the 4th century, the Christianity could spread. And so this chant comes from the 4th, 5th, 6th century. Then it was more or less fixed at the end of the 8th and written down on manuscripts with a pneumatic, as I said, notation from the 9th, 10th, 11th century. And this is exceptional. You see, we have these manuscripts from which, comparing different manuscripts, we can understand now more deeply than 100 years ago what this music was. And so you see, it comes from an oral tradition. What oral tradition? Of the Western Europe, mostly, if we include Italy. And in Italy, there was different traditions also. The Gauls, Gaul, it means ancient France. And it was a large country with different provinces. And we may include a little of Spain, the north of Spain, and then starting from the 5th, 6th century, also Great Britain, and then from the 6th century, Ireland, and then it spread, you know, in Europe. And there was an oral tradition, Indo-European oral tradition, which progressively created what we call early Christian or ancient Christian chant, and what was called, but falsely, Gregorian chant at the end of the 19th century. And the problem of the scales is very important, because now our Western music, you see, is founded on the so-called tempered, equalized scale, which is strongly different from the natural ancient scales, for instance, from the natural scales of India, be it South India or North India, or you see, our modern scale is not based on natural laws of resonance, of natural laws of physics. It is an artificial scale. How is it possible that the Western music has chosen an artificial scale? This scale appeared, let's say, 150, 170 years ago, at the beginning of the 19th century. Why? Because the natural scales, as for instance for traditional Indian music, are complicated scales. Nature is complicated. If you study nature, it's more and more complicated. And if you have simple music, one voice music, as the Indian tradition of singing, be it Drupad or Khyal, or you see, it's one voice. Even if you have two singers or singers, it's mostly one voice. And we had the Gregorian chant, the ancient Christian chant, was one voice, monodic, as we say. But then our Western music became more and more complicated. And if you take the 17th century music, it was almost classical music. It was complicated music because you had first violin, second violin, alto, cellos, contrabass, harpsichord, trumpets, flutes, and choir with higher voice, female voice, and lower voice, and so and so. So you see, it's a very complicated music. And to deal with a complicated music, with a complicated scale, the natural scales, it's too complicated. So as far as the music became more and more complicated, you see in the 18th century, Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven, you see, the music is more and more complicated with big orchestras and so on. Then the tendency was to simplify the scale, because a natural scale with a complicated music is too difficult, too complicated. And so, to make it short, at the beginning of the 19th century, particularly with the piano, they decided to simplify the scale and to equalize intervals. You see, you could have the sa-ri, a high one or a little one, and they took a middle one. Sa-ri-ga, ri-ga, also you can have ri-ga, or you see, a bigger, and they took the middle. So we say that it was an equalized scale, simplified by equalization of intervals. And we say that it's a scale with equalized intervals, while the natural scales and the traditional Indian scales, be it North India or South India, they have these different intervals. Intervals are not equalized. And it's very important, and this, if I may say, it's my specialty, to sing this early Christian chant in the scales that were used at that time. And here it's very important to study in a comparative way the scales of the Indo-European music. And I had the chance to study Indian music, Northern and South Indian music, Carnatic tradition, and to make a comparative study between the early Christian chant, 500 years ago, and what we know of Indian tradition now, of course. Mm-hmm. So this, speaking of natural scales and natural scales which are related with resonance. And just 2 words more. The Western tradition of early Christian chant has developed, and in architecture, resonant spaces. And the resonant spaces are churches. And the Romanesque architecture is 11th, 10th, 12th centuries and before. They realized very sounding, wonderful sounds of Romanesque churches. And we have many, many churches in France, in Italy, in Germany, but a lot in France, in Spain also, that sound very in a wonderful way. They have a wonderful resonance. So you make oh, and the whole church sound oh. You see, they have worked this resonance aspect. And it's very interesting, you see, to sing in such churches in the natural scales, which are based on the laws of resonance.
What is, their soothing effect of Gregorian chants, how they deal with the notes or the scales. So that's very, very similar. It's similar, but you may say that it's not similar, but it is a different way of exposition. There in Gregorian chants, they work on the mode. There's every mode for every time, and wherever there's a church service, not exactly that service, what I want to say, but there is for each and every time, they have the mode where they sing, and it goes very soothingly, like the way we glide or we oscillate our notes from one note to another. There is oscillation which takes place, how the one scale hands it over to another one. So that's a beautiful way of exposition. Of course, they have words. We have the ragas. Ragas, you can't exactly say a mode in that term, because we can have many spiritual sort of text, but they have a very fixed spiritual text which is sung in different time of the day in the churches. We have the ragas. So of course we have our ancient time goes before 2000 or even before that, where we talk about the Vedas, when and our music stands, they say that Udat, Anudat, Swarit, the initial 3 notes, but people also have found out different ways of elaborating the thing, like mostly what you hear in the chantings of Rig Veda. Whereas, sorry, in Samveda, it is all dedicated to the sound. Like in usual of Rig Veda, do 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 do. So Uchir Uddata, Nichir Anudata, when you go on the higher note, Uchir Uddata, when it is higher note, Nichir Anudata, Anudatta, it is the lower note, lower tone rather, tone, and Samarita Swarita, it's the middle note, where you, from this middle note, you go high and you go down and then you again reconnect it. That is what is happening in Rig Veda. But in Samveda, there are more notes than these 3. And it's the more control of the breath control is there. Of course, the breath control is here in this one also. But where you glide one note to another, and there was recitation of the shlokas, the hymns, and the verses. And some of the grades have lost their life. in the recitations, because they would try to say as many notes with these soothing effects. They have lost their lives in holding one note for that long. So this is why we say that it is more towards the Samvedas, other than the Rig Ved, Yajurved, Athurved, and Samved. So these three we have started from initially 3 notes. Maybe we can just say that we have initially started with 1 note, but it has everything has come. We have extracted things from the nature, and from our modulation of the tone, we have created our language, and we have created our music. This is how it has initially gone in. So it is, our music is spiritual music. I'm talking about our music means Gregorian chants also, and I'm talking about Drupad also. This is spiritual, but it's more meditative music, where he's describing of these from 12th century and from 8th century also. The construction of the churches were so much, so much there that it was helping to just whisper a bit and you can hear much more. So it was sort of elaborating. You just blow for 20%, and then it can take you to, say, another 50% of the sound is taken over, and then when you get little more sound, then you are also, all the musicians, all the singers, they get so elated and happy to get into those domes where you can hear these type of long lasting sounds. So what happens in this? So our initially we are just holding the notes more. So more relevance of the silence is also very much there, because musical note or a scale is, of course, it's a vibration. Vibration is there. So what we say as is when you struck sound, then you get the sound and it travels. But anhad nad, the nad, which which invites the sound, the silence, which suggests the sound, that is anhad nad. So here it stopped. The sound, the people who are musicians, they can see there is some other tone which is traveling a little bit further. I don't know if I'm able to tell you about this. Of course, if I get into explaining Drupad, of course, these people they've been hearing about Drupad a lot. So I want to be in discussion with him. What do you mean?
Yeah,
you just elaborate that, on what you have to say.
So since you spoke about Anhad Nag sound in general, so my question to both of you, maybe I'll start with Professor first. So in both like Gregorian chants or in Drupad, or let's say in any spiritual artistic music, the importance of sound, especially the resonance, is very important to connect to a higher level of spirit, like a higher power, be it Buddhism, be it Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, or even in Sikhism. So in most of this spiritual like artistic music, the importance of sound is there. So what is it about sound or resonance which helps you to connect to a higher authority?
So may I say some words to answer to Vasifuddin? You spoke rather of mode.
Yes.
It's an ancient notion, you know, the notion of raga, and in Greek, in ancient Greece, it was ethos. A mode, first, it's an inner state of consciousness. For example, you can be happy, joyful, or you can be in sorrow, or despair, or you can be wrath, you're furious, or you're afraid. And with all these different inner states, your voice changes. When I'm happy, and if I'm in sorrow, oh, how are you this morning? Wow, wonderful. And how are you this evening? I'm tired. See, the voice has changed. And the reflect of an inner state in the voice, this gives the mode. So the mode is an objective human notion, and which is very important, and Vasifuddin insisted on this, that a mode changes, you know, it's a little change in the voice. We have, how are you? Or you see, this is a small interval. You are tired and despaired. And the other it's very subtle differences, you see, but they are very meaningful, because the meaning, the inner meaning, is different. And here, the natural scales are essential. In the tempered scale, in the modern Western scale, you cannot change the interval sa, re, do, re, you see, is fixed. You cannot make this and no more. So here you understand the natural scales. The scales based on natural resonance are essential. While the Gregorian chant, as all the Western music since, say, the beginning of the 19th century, is based on the artificial scale. So you see, a new approach to early Christian chant is to sing it in ancient scales, which, as in the Indian scales, which was illustrated by Vasifuddin, you see that you have the possibility of have a little higher interval, a little lower. And this is which makes a unity of the Indo-European tradition. But Nilesh spoke of other tradition. Of course, you are right. The ancient traditions, not influenced by the modern Western music. And nowadays, it's everywhere. You have these synthesizers, and you have the rock music, and so, and it destroys completely the ancient natural, yes. And unfortunately, in Africa and in many, many countries, the ancient scales, the subtle scales, the notion of modality, of the expression of an inner state by little change, you see, are disappearing completely. And
no, in the natural language also, like you can be you and can be you. You have come. And at times you just don't have to use the word. Person understands when you are welcomed and when you are not. So this is the silent or salient note which plays its role. You have come. You have come. You have come. You. That's another way of welcoming, is just a gesture, that which says. So in our rag, we can, we can describe many different sort of moods. We have rasas, 9 rasas, 7 we use in music, because hasya means laughing, and what do you call vibhas means the rodra means rodra we put, but what will you say?
Surprise.
भयानक को क्या बोलेंगे? Yeah.
Afraid, yeah.
Yeah, so that one is not there. We don't use it in music. This is for theater people to use these 9 rasas. Otherwise, karuna and all these different rasas, of course, the affectionate or depression or separation, all these type of ras we use in our musical ways. And so in rag, we have one thing is there. I don't know how much. What should I say, Mr. Igor Saab? I can say Igor Saab. You're saying Wasifuddin, right? I would say Igor. So that what would you? Means in rag, how we do go into different type of. We can use a lot of sections, and we have connectivity. Our sound, our Indian sounds are always connected with bass. There is some connectivity with the bass, whether we go in the higher octave also. Now Indian or Drupal style.
And don't lose.
To know that.
No, I wanted to say, don't lose your ancient scales and your ancient tradition. You see, you have the advantage of ancient roots, and you have the roots which come from a very high spiritual tradition. Spirituality is disappearing in our modern societies, and you have the advantage of this continuity from ancient tradition, while in the West, we have lost this continuity. So be aware that you have a treasure, and don't be influenced by microphones and all modern synthesizers. This is very important.
I don't even use electronic tantra for my concerts.
Oh, no, I
have switched on that. But
I'm not speaking of you personally. I'm speaking to India. I'm speaking to India. Yeah, of course you can have modern music, but the traditional one has to be kept really, yes. And you see, because it's rooted with very deep levels of consciousness. As I said, the notion of modality is an expression of inner states, including inner spiritual states. So for me, it was, of course, very important to have a deep contact, as I said, with the traditional Indian music. And I must say, some musicians from India coming to the West, they want also, making things with guitars, with pianos, wonderful Paris, Tokyo, New York, and so. And I was saying to them, no, your tradition is deeply rooted spiritual tradition. So no guitars, no piano. Yeah, it belongs to the word of prayer. And the Western early Christian chant, of course, also. But we had the deep work, it was a deep work, to restore this chant in its model ancient tradition. And model tradition has only meaning in natural scales, as we said, in following the natural laws, because as a string vibrates, our body vibrates the same and the temple also vibrates the same. Yeah. So keep your tradition, keep your tradition. It is a source now, you see, to other traditions interested in deeply spiritual singing. I have seen, heard so many traditions of music which from the ancient scales progressively switched, because it's simpler, to the temperate scale, you see, and then the deep tradition is lost. Let me sing just, you see the difference of the Gregorian chant, as it's called, and I hope you could heard monks of the Abbey of Solesmes, of other monks sing. But you see, if you try to restore it in its truth, musical and spiritual, I would just sing a small song. Yeah, it's a praise to Hail Maria, the Lord is with thee. Blessed are thee among all women. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus. It's
Wow.
a so-called D mode with special intervals. Yes.
Wow. So this is what is, how it leads you to the silence, and
Yeah,
from
that's it.
silence how it emerges, and from how it takes you, it leads you to silence. That's the very, very meditative sort of sound.
To silence and prayer and prayer.
Yes. Well, in India, you can't avoid God, because everything is for God, everything is through God, everything is with God. So
And
we
you have
can't,
you have to
yeah,
leave
we
it to
can't,
feel it.
and we feel sinner as we lose him for a little while. So we feel that we have created a sin. So this is the state of the Indians, the South Asians, I would say, that when we lose him for few, because you can measure the time, but you can't measure the moment. And this type of music takes you to the moment, and moment can be of a second and can be of hour also. But the beauty of that moment, that it leaves a beautiful mark on your soul. What you cherish, what you remember, how you remember. The experience will never be the same, but we compare our experience with what we have had.
Thank you for your words. Thank you for these words.
Thank you so much, Professor. It was my pleasure to listening to both of you, and it was a very
Next time I come, we'll definitely meet, because you have met, I think, Fahimuddin Dagar Sahab and Sahiduddin Dagar. Them, na?
Yes, I met many of them here.
Yeah. So must have met my father and uncle also. And
Yes, I have
elder.
the chance. I had the chance. Yes, it was wonderful. And
So-
thank you, Gilesh, for contributing to this very interesting and deep meeting.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure to listening both of you. Thank you so much.
And SPIC MACAY, all the best, and just go ahead, just get more and more students.
We keep contacts through emails.
Yes.
Sure.
We would like to thank Professor Reznikov sir and Ustad Basfuddin Dagerji for their time today and making this event an even more special one for our participants. We also extend our gratitude to our volunteer Nilesh Vyas from Paris and all our participants for attending this event and making it a success. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And we will be starting our third program for the afternoon session, that is Gurbani by Gurdev Singh Ji. And so we'll just take a short break just for 1 minute, and you can join us back after 1 minute.